From Chicago studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Samana Siddiqui. First, the headlines. Biden urges turning pain into action after school shooting. SCOTUS rejects challenge to New York religious exemption repeal. Meet the Muslim woman running for office in Georgia. Indian court sentences Kashmiri leader Yasin Malik to life in prison. Israel demolishes Mosque in West Bank. And Taliban signed deal to hand over 4 key airports to UAE. Our top story tonight. U.S. President Joe Biden vowed to find a way to tighten gun ownership laws after Tuesday's mass shooting at a Texas elementary school that left at least 21 dead. The shooter killed 19 school children and 2 adults at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Department of Public Safety Sergeant Eric Estrada told CNN. The 18-year-old shooter, Salvador Rolando Ramos, was killed by a law enforcement official. He was bullied for having a stutter and a strong lisp, friends and family said. According to the Gun Violence Archive, Tuesday's massacre was the second deadliest U.S. school shooting of the past decade. The first is the December 2012 Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre in Connecticut, in which 28 people were killed, including 20 children. The 2018 Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting in Parkland, Florida, took 17 lives and now ranks third.
Another massacre, Uvalde, Texas, an elementary school. Beautiful, innocent, 2nd, 3rd, 4th graders. And how many scores of little children who witness what happened see their friends die as if they're on a battlefield, for God's sake. I am sick and tired of it. We have to act. And don't tell me we can't have an impact on this carnage. I spent my career as a senator and a vice president working to pass common sense gun laws. We can and won't prevent every tragedy, but we know they work and have positive impact. It's time to turn this pain into action. For every parent, for every citizen of this country, we have to make it clear to every elected official in this country, it's time to act.
Among Ruwa Roman's goals for her first elected office run is showing Muslims we have a place in this world. The 29-year-old community organizer is nearly 6 months into a grassroots effort to represent Georgia's 97th House District as a Democrat. If elected, she would be the first Muslim woman elected to the Georgia State Assembly. A senior consultant at Deloitte, Roman was always interested in politics and had volunteered in every election cycle since 2014. But she never thought of being a candidate until she attended a candidate training seminar last fall through her work for the Georgia Muslim Voter Project and CARE. Though she was there only to offer feedback to a colleague, a reporter quoted her as a woman running for office. Once the story was published, Roman received overwhelming support for her candidacy. Roman took up the mantle, saying, "We can genuinely change our world. We just need to show up." The U.S. Supreme Court has refused to hear a case challenging the legality of the 2019 repeal of the religious exemption from vaccine mandates to attend school. The case was filed by 55 New York families and the nonprofit Children's Health Defense. Lead counsel Michael Sussman said attorneys have argued the case for almost 3 years. The New York State Legislature repealed a 50-year-old religious exemption for students on June 13, 2019. Lawmakers accused religious people of being fraudsters and violated their First Amendment protections, Sussman said. He claims there was ample evidence state legislators had shown open hostility to people of faith and faith in general, yet 4 Supreme Court justices voted against hearing the case. On Tuesday, Republican voters delivered a stark repudiation of the former U.S. President Donald Trump's big lie that the 2020 election was stolen from him. They backed Georgia Governor Brian Kemp for re-election by a huge margin over a candidate backed by Trump. Trump used much of his political capital handpicking David Perdue to run against Kemp for the GOP nomination. Kemp became a target of Trump's wrath for refusing to help overturn the 2020 election. Perdue made Trump's false claims about 2020 a centerpiece of his campaign, but the former senator had to concede the race as the early count showed him trailing by almost 50 points less than 90 minutes after polls closed. President Joe Biden today signed an executive order to advance effective, accountable policing and criminal justice practices that will build public trust and strengthen safety. The White House announcement came on the second anniversary of the murder of George Floyd at the hands of a former Minneapolis police officer. Floyd's murder spurred protests nationwide and calls to acknowledge the legacy of systemic racism in the criminal justice system and in institutions. Biden said police cannot keep communities safe without public trust and confidence in law enforcement and the criminal justice system. The nation must do more to live up to its founding promise of fair and impartial justice for all, the White House statement read. On Tuesday, Australia, India, Japan, and the U.S. voiced strong support for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all states and peaceful settlement of disputes. The White House released a joint statement from the leaders of the U.S.-led Quadrilateral Security Dialogue Alliance. Conflict resolution can be achieved without resorting to threat or use of force or any unilateral attempt to change the status quo, they said. The group vowed to make the Indo-Pacific region more resilient for the 21st century. The four countries' heads of state met Wednesday in Tokyo. It was their second in-person summit, coinciding with Biden's first Asia tour. On Tuesday, U.S. officials said they are appalled by jarring photographic evidence of China's alleged rights abuses against Muslim Uyghurs. State Department spokesman Ned Price said new reports add to an already damning body of evidence documenting the Chinese government's atrocities in Xinjiang. Price said Chinese authorities continue to deny any wrongdoing despite increasing public awareness and strong calls for accountability. He called on Beijing to immediately release all those arbitrarily detained and to end mass detention, torture, forced sterilization, and the use of forced labor. A BBC investigation this week revealed China has a highly secretive system of mass incarceration in Xinjiang, as well as a shoot-to-kill policy for those who try to escape. On Monday, U.S. leaders said roughly 20 nations have pledged to provide Ukraine with new arms shipments to help defend itself against Russia's assault. The new arms packages include critically needed artillery, ammunition, coastal defense systems, tanks, and other armored vehicles, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said. Other nations have committed to training Ukrainian troops and helping Kyiv sustain its existing armaments, he told reporters at the Pentagon. Italy, Greece, Norway, and Poland will provide Ukraine with artillery systems and ammunition, Austin added. He also noted that Denmark and the Czech Republic are providing substantial support, including attack helicopters, tanks, and rocket systems. On Monday, Denmark announced its decision to supply Ukraine with a Harpoon anti-ship launcher and associated missiles. Who made it into Time's 100 most influential people of 2022? Let's find out after the break, so stay tuned. And we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
There are 16 million children struggling with hunger in America. That's 1 in 5 daughters, sons, neighbors, and classmates who don't know where their next meal is coming from. Yet billions of pounds of good food go to waste every year. It's time we do something about it. Feeding America is a nationwide network of food banks that helps provide meals to millions of kids and families in need. Visit feedingamerica.org to help them feed even more. Together, we can solve hunger. Together, we're feeding America.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
Billboards are popping up all over the country with an...
Our neighbors don't realize that Muslims are absolutely opposed to ISIS.
Salam. My name is Abdul Malik Mujahid. I'm an imam in Chicago.
60 shots! No me! No justice! No me!
So how do we bring up the energy which can really have an impact on the world?
You need to build bridges of understanding among people, and we need to have America moving forward.
That lesson learned had brought the strength of humanity to America, which is the diversity.
Mujahid Talks, only on Muslim Network TV. Faithfully connected.
Open up your eyes.
Assalamu alaikum everyone, it's your brother Zain Bika from South Africa. One of the first educational programs ever produced for Muslim children was the ever popular Adam's World series. The colorful and comical Muslim puppets stole the heart of a generation. Sound Vision will be releasing brand new episodes of Adam's World with the launch of a Adam's World app. Subscribers will enjoy new Adam's World episodes as they are released, as well as all the classic episodes of Adam's World. So visit adamsworldapp.com now to learn more, subscribe and enjoy new adventures of Adam and his friends. And let's keep helping tomorrow's Muslims today. Assalamu alaikum.
Adam's World. Believe me, there's a lot to see. Bismillah. Let's explore.
To stop this genocide, we need your help.
On Monday, Pervez, Samia Suluhu Hassan, Omar Bandial, and Huda Khamosh were listed among Time magazine's 100 most influential people of 2022. The annual listicle highlights those around the globe recognized for changing the world. Pervez is chairperson of the Asian Federation Against Involuntary Disappearances and was arrested by Indian authorities last November. The 45-year-old spoke out against human rights violations and injustices in Indian-held Kashmir and called out India's persecution of the country's more than 200 million Muslims. Tanzanian President Samia Suluhu Hassan was also in the list. The 62-year-old is serving as the sixth and current president of Tanzania. She gave the country a diplomatic facelift after its isolation during the reign of her predecessor John Magufuli. Omar Bandial is Chief Justice of Pakistan. In early April, the Supreme Court of Pakistan, led by Bandial, overturned then Prime Minister Imran Khan's move to dissolve parliament, declaring it unconstitutional. Huda Khamosh is a renowned Afghan women's rights activist, journalist, and campaigner. The 26-year-old launched several public programs to raise awareness of issues related to women's health. Over the last few weeks, streets in several parts of India's capital, New Delhi, have been overrun by bulldozers. Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal lashed out against the Bharatiya Janata Party for carrying out the biggest destruction in independent India. This wasn't just another tussle between Kejriwal's Aam Aadmi Party and the ruling BJP. The BJP declared the demolition drives were aimed at throwing out illegal immigrants, Muslim Bangladeshis and Rohingyas, from Delhi. The Hindu Nationalist Party has long targeted Muslims, their lives, livelihoods, homes, and heritage. The BJP's Delhi unit chief, Adesh Gupta, said there is no place for Rohingyas and Bangladeshis in Delhi because they foment riots. Critics say targeted demolitions in Muslim-dominated areas indicate the BJP is evicting Muslims under the guise of civic governance. On Tuesday, Israeli army forces demolished a mosque in the occupied West Bank, according to Palestinian authorities. Israeli soldiers cited lack of a construction permit for raising the mosque in Al-Ramadin community near Qalqilya, the Waqf ministry said. Palestinian Waqf Minister Hatem al-Bakri called the mosque demolition a crime and an affront on the sentiments of Muslims. Israel widely uses the pretext of construction permits to demolish Palestinian structures. This is especially the case in Area C, which makes up around 60% of the occupied West Bank. Under the 1995 Oslo Accords between Israel and the Palestine Liberation Organization, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, was divided into three areas, A, B, and C. Israel prevents Palestinians from building in parts of the West Bank designated as Area C, which falls under Israel's administrative and security control. On Tuesday, Afghanistan's Taliban interim government signed a deal to hand over the country's 4 key airports to a state-run United Arab Emirates company. Under the deal, the control and management of international airports in the cities of Kabul, Kandahar, Herat, and Mazar-e-Sharif will be transferred to the UAE Aviation Company. Afghanistan's acting Deputy Prime Minister Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar said the Afghan government seeks good relations with all countries. He added that now is the time for rebuilding Afghanistan. The Taliban are inviting people to invest in the country, saying the government will provide facilities and security to investors. An Indian court on Wednesday sentenced Kashmiri pro-freedom leader Yasin Malik to life in prison in a terrorism financing case. Malik was convicted last week of funding terrorism, waging war, and disturbing peace in Kashmir. He has been under detention at Delhi's Tihar jail since 2019, along with several other top Kashmiri leaders and activists, some of whom have also been charged in the same case. The National Investigation Agency Court handed Yasin Malik 2 life sentences, 5 10-year sentences, and 3 5-year terms, all of which will run concurrently. The court clarified that the life sentence means imprisonment until death. He has to pay a fine of over $12,000. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned, and we'll be right back after these messages.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Imam Malik Mujahid in Chicago. Just like you, I was moved by that Allahu Akbar lady. She stood her ground, fearful of none, for her hijab and for her education. Sisters and brothers, Indian Muslims are facing a genocide. India does not care for Muslim protesting, but it does care for the world opinion. Therefore, we must push the United Nations. The UN has a responsibility to protect. They must prevent genocide. Please sign this UN petition now. Get others to sign. It will help. Trust me, it will help. We need 1 million signatures, brothers and sisters. Please sign now.
Dad, they took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
We are Justice for All. Headquartered in the heart of downtown Chicago, Justice for All is a global humanitarian initiative dedicated to raising awareness for human rights concerns impacting vulnerable minority groups. Our diverse team of staff and volunteers, led by Imam Malik Mujahid, work tirelessly to help Justice for All achieve their goals. We promote policies that protect religious freedom, address the root causes of mass displacement, and recognize the plight of refugees and forced migrants. Together, we can continue to stand up for justice. Justice for all.
Welcome back. It's time for our in-depth analysis segment. Let's watch.
And now we move to discuss a distressing but important topic, the topic of domestic extremism in the United States, in particular, the threat of white supremacism. I don't need to tell you what happened over the weekend in Buffalo, New York. An avowed white supremacist, an Islamophobe, and anti-Semite carrying an assault rifle walked into a grocery store in a African-American part of Buffalo and opened fire. He killed 10 people, including men and women who were simply out shopping, as well as a security guard who tried to stop him. Before he committed this violence, he published a manifesto that explained exactly why he did what he did. He was a believer in the Great Replacement theory that Jewish politicians are plotting to replace white Americans with Muslims and African Americans and Latinos, and that violence is the way to stop this conspiracy. We've seen similar hatred expressed by the Christchurch shooter and others around the world. This keeps happening. And so to understand why it's happening and what, if anything, we can do about it as a society, we'd like to bring on today our special guest. Our guest today is Mr. Daryl Johnson. Mr. Johnson is one of our nation's foremost experts on domestic extremist groups. He began his career as a civilian in the U.S. Army, and he's held a number of government positions, most recently as a senior analyst at the Department of Homeland Security. He is the founder and director of DT Analytics. That's a private consulting firm for law enforcement agencies. He is also the author of Hate Land, a long, hard look at America's extremist heart. He also authored Right-Wing Resurgence, How a Domestic Terrorism Threat is Being Ignored. He's also a freelance writer for various civil rights organizations, and he has testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee on the threat of extremism and hate crimes. Very happy to have Mr. Johnson here today. Thank you for joining us, sir. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well, despite the circumstances.
Indeed, indeed. So, Mr. Johnson, let me start by asking you to tell us a bit more about yourself and how you became interested in this subject and this threat that is haunting our nation.
Yeah, so you pretty much gave a background on my federal career looking at domestic terrorism. I actually worked for the U.S. Army as a counterterrorism analyst back in the mid-'90s, right after the Oklahoma City bombing. I also worked for the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, which is a federal law enforcement agency that investigates the criminal activities of people that violate our firearms and explosives laws, as well as use arson as a violent tactic. How I got interested in this subject, that goes way back to my childhood when I entered a local department store and saw the letters KKK inscribed on a bathroom stall. And I went home and asked my parents about that and was shocked to learn that there were these white supremacist secret organizations that were founded after the Civil War that had conducted violence against the freed slaves and others. My interest grew as a teenager when I watched a national event unfold on TV, which involved a standoff between the ATF and FBI and this white supremacist insular community called Covenant Sword Arm of the Lord, which provided safe haven to domestic terrorists and was plotting to poison water supplies, blow up a gay church in Kansas City, and things like this. And so from this early childhood interest, I went to college and continued to study and learn about these groups and ultimately turned that into a career.
Well, Mr. Johnson, that's a fascinating history and a disturbing history of things that you've witnessed that inspired you to then take on this threat. So, look, you and I, we've seen, mass shootings occur in recent years. You've seen it going all the way back to the 90s at least. Let me just start by asking you, when you heard the news out of Buffalo, what's your reaction now when this happens? For some people, it's still anger. For some people, it's shock. Some people, it's an utter lack of surprise. It's almost a feeling of resignation. What's your reaction when these mass shootings happen? What do you do in response?
Each time one of these ideologically motivated violent acts occurs, I get this feeling in my gut that I wish the government would do more to try to prevent these types of attacks. I wrote a prescient intelligence report back in 2009 warning our policymakers, our police chiefs and sheriffs around the country that we were going to see a shift in the threat environment from primarily Al-Qaeda inspired individuals to more homegrown white nationalist anti-government type groups. And unfortunately, my prescient warning got lost in the political firestorm that ensued, which created a chilling effect in the law enforcement and intelligence communities that kind of deterred people from looking at this threat. And so fast forward to 2022, we've had year after year of these attacks, and the body counts keep getting bigger and bigger. And it was only until last year that our administration finally issued a national strategy to combat domestic terrorism. But we're way behind the game right now. And so even though I'm optimistic that we have this national strategy, there's so much more that needs to be done.
Mr. Johnson, let me ask you the obvious follow-up question. What should be done? What can be done? I mean, it seems looking at this that, number one, white supremacists aren't going to change their minds, most of them anyway. Number two, these high-powered weapons are out there. The government has no interest in banning them, much less confiscating them. And so some of us just look at this and go, this is not, how do you solve this problem? So, as an expert, what do you think? What do you call it? What's the government planning to do as part of this strategy? And what more do you think they should be doing?
It all begins with our publicly elected officials calling these violent acts out as terrorism. They try to minimize it by saying it's a crazed gunman or it's a hate crime. And even though hate crimes are hideous and horrific, it's truly minimizing what happened in Buffalo. This wasn't just a bar fight between two individuals based on race. This wasn't, a neighbor pitted against another neighbor. This was an individual who traveled 200 miles based on a violent belief system to attack African Americans in their community. And it was an attack against not only African Americans in Buffalo, it was an attack against African Americans across the country. So it all starts with acknowledging what this is. This attack was meant to cause fear in the community. It was meant to try to draw attention to this cause and inspire other white supremacists to follow suit. And so that's where it all starts. And then we can get into a national dialogue and increase people's understanding about this phenomena and develop programs at the grassroots level that target these vulnerable individuals and try to persuade them not to get caught up in these white supremacist groups or these conspiracy theories. The federal government itself needs to hold a national summit on this issue and invite our global leaders, because this isn't a uniquely American problem anymore. This is a global issue. And an organization that I serve as the honorary board member, We Are Many United Against Hate, has recommended to set up a national dialogue between our legislators and our youth to bring this subject to the national attention and spotlight. And so we can get some insights from our youth on how they're being recruited and radicalized.
Well, yeah, that all sounds important, Mr. John. Let me ask you this. If someone were to say, that's all good, dialogue is important, trying to intervene is important, but in the meantime, what would you, as someone who has worked with the Army, ATF, you've been an expert in this, what would you advise minority communities who feel like, if I walk into a mosque, if I walk into a grocery store, if I walk into a synagogue, I might be attacked? Do you have any advice you'd give them for how to protect themselves while this long-term effort to neutralize white supremacism is going on?
With regards to terrorism, I don't want to breed fear and paranoia among, communities that could be targeted, but just be vigilant, particularly when you're around large gatherings of minorities or you're going to your place of worship. We can take physical security measures at your place of worship, like, installing cameras, locking certain doors, only allowing, people in when everyone's there, all kinds of things like that. And also, to prepare for a mass casualty shooting event, to have first aid supplies on hand at your place of worship. These are just, common sense things that we can do to try to safeguard ourselves and just be prepared in case this happens. But I don't want people to think that this is going to happen, to them or get them fearful of this, because everybody will just stay inside and not do anything.
Right. As you said, we've got to live our lives, but with vigilance and preparation. And, may God forbid we have to use that preparation, but, you do what you can and prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and then, do all you can. But just carry on with your life. Mr. Johnson, so let me ask you this final question. So as we look at the connections between domestic extremism, what this individual in Buffalo said and believed, and what others around the world said and believed, you see remarkable similarities. For example, I've read the manifesto that Mr. Tarrant out of New Zealand wrote before he conducted the Christchurch shooting. And then I've looked over the manifesto that this individual in Buffalo wrote. And the similarities, this sort of paranoia, this anti-Semitism, this racism, this xenophobia, Islamophobia, and this being inundated with not only hatred from the dark corners of the internet, but mainstream media. Is there anything the media should be doing to try to tamp down on extremism coming from its ranks? Not just the government trying to address, but is there anything mainstream media, even social media companies, should be doing to try to address the proliferation of this sort of bigotry?
Yeah, so two things come to mind. Number one, our publicly elected officials, our media personalities need to realize that words do have consequences. And so by having, this heated rhetoric and this mainstreaming of conspiracy theories like the Great Replacement Theory or QAnon, there are listeners out there that look to them as being, experts in their field, people that are highly educated, and they rationalize to themselves, if these people are endorsing these types of things, it must be true. And it kind of lends credence to their cause and may push someone to eventually conduct an act of violence. The second thing is policing the content. This is not the job of the government. This is the role of private industry. When you set up these platforms, these social media gathering places, we need to be able to police the content. And when you see someone that's making threats to certain communities and they're posting pictures of themselves acquiring weaponry, showing a fascination with the local congregation, these types of things, these are red flags that should be immediately reported to law enforcement as potential radicalization indicators. So just law enforcement educating our social media companies, private industry on these types of indicators, I think would go a long way to reporting these things and getting investigators involved and seeing if there truly is a threat.
Understood. And final question, Mr. Johnson. So one of the things that always is debated in the wake of a mass shooting is the issue of gun control, whether or not anything can be done, should be done to rein in the threat of these high-powered weapons. Now, you've worked, with the military, with ATF, so I'm sure you have a strong respect for the Second Amendment, as most of us do. But what are your thoughts on, is there anything reasonable that any policies the government should be pursuing in terms of trying to limit the ability of people to use these dangerous high-powered weapons? Anything that can be done, should be done, in your opinion?
This is a very controversial topic. One thing that came to my mind, I don't know if this is realistic or not, but apparently this individual had made a threat to his high school recently, and he was actually investigated, subjected to a psychological exam by the police, and they determined that he wasn't a true threat. And so here was a, potential opportunity for, therapy, maybe put people that make threats to their schools and other types of things on some sort of, probationary waiting period before they could go out and purchase a weapon. So here we had this individual had contact with police, had made a threat to his school, but yet he was able to still go out and somehow acquire these weapons. So that may be something to look at. Of course, gun owners, parents who own guns need to really take responsibility to lock them up, put trigger locks on them, put them in a locked armory at the house so that there's not easy access for their children or their friends that come over to the home.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Mr. Johnson, we want to thank you so much for your time today. Greatly appreciated. I hope that we don't have to have another conversation about an incident like this, God willing. But as you said, prepare, be vigilant, and let's advocate for some real change this time. Thank you for your work on this, and thank you for your time.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
That's all from our Chicago studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Salam and good night.